The gunshot echoed across the empty plains, shattering the stillness of the Montana twilight as Nora Sullivan ducked behind the weathered remains of her family's wagon. Blood soaked through her tattered dress where the bullet had grazed her shoulder, but it was the least of her worries as the flames consuming what remained of her homestead painted the darkening sky with an unholy glow. Montana Territory, 1877. The land of opportunity had become Nora's personal hell in less than a day. "Come on out, girl. Ain't nowhere to run." The gravelly voice of Silas Morgan, the man who'd sworn to take her father's land by any means necessary, carried on the wind. "Your pa's debts are due, and I aim to collect." Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face as she clutched her father's pocket, watched the only possession she'd managed to salvage. Her parents were gone, buried hastily beneath the cottonwood tree just 3 days prior after fever had taken them both. Now, at 22, she was alone, with Morgan and his men determined to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Another shot splintered the wood near her head, forcing her to crawl desperately toward the tall grass beyond. If she could just make it to the creek bed, she might escape under cover of the rapidly approaching darkness. "I see her. She's making for the west field." A second voice called out, followed by pounding hoofbeats. Nora scrambled to her feet, clutching her skirts as she ran. Her lungs burned with each breath, the cool evening air knifing through her chest. The tall grass whipped against her legs as she plunged forward, praying for a miracle that seemed increasingly unlikely. The sound of a horse approaching from her right sent her heart into her throat. This was it, they had outflanked her. She stumbled, falling hard onto the unforgiving ground as a rider emerged from the shadows. But instead of Morgan or his men, a stranger atop a massive buckskin stallion appeared, his features obscured by the brim of his hat and the gathering dusk. "Get up. Take my hand." The stranger's voice was commanding but not unkind as he extended his arm toward her. Nora hesitated only a moment before reaching up, her desperation outweighing caution. With surprising strength, he pulled her up behind him in one fluid motion. "Hold tight," he instructed, and Nora wrapped her arms around his waist as the horse lurched forward, powerful muscles bunching beneath them as they thundered away from her burning home. Gunshots followed their retreat, but soon faded into the distance as the rider pushed his mount harder, guiding them into a dense copse of trees that lined the creek bed. Only when they were well hidden among the shadows did he slow their pace, leading the horse carefully through the shallow water to mask their trail. "They won't follow us through the water in the dark," he said, his voice low and steady. "Too risky for the horses." Nora could only nod against his back, her entire body trembling with shock and exhaustion. She hadn't realized how cold she was until now, her soaked dress clinging to her skin in the cool night air. "You're injured," he observed, twisting slightly to look at her shoulder. "We need to get you somewhere safe, get that wound cleaned." "Who are you?" Nora finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Zachary Finch," he replied, guiding his horse up the far bank of the creek. "Most folks just call me Zach. I was passing through when I saw the smoke. Figured someone might need help." "Nora Sullivan," she offered weakly. They burned everything. My parents are dead, buried just days ago. Morgan said my father owed him money, but it's a lie. He's wanted our land since we arrived." Zach's shoulders tensed beneath her hands. "Silas Morgan." When she confirmed with a small nod against his back, he continued, "Man's been trying to take over the whole valley. Your folks aren't the first he's run off. Or worse." They rode in silence for nearly an hour, the landscape gradually changing as they climbed higher into the foothills. Eventually, a small cabin came into view, nestled against the mountainside with a corral and modest barn nearby. "My place," Zach explained as they approached. "It's not much, but it's safe. Morgan and his men don't come up this far. Too much trouble for them." He helped her down from the horse, steadying her when her legs threatened to give way. Up close, in the faint light spilling from the cabin windows, Nora could finally see her rescuer clearly. Zachary Finch was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with keen blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. His jawline was strong beneath several days' worth of stubble, and a small scar cut through his right eyebrow. "Let's get you inside," he said, leading the way to the cabin door. "My sister's here. She can help with that wound." The interior of the cabin was surprisingly warm and welcoming. A young woman with the same striking blue eyes as Zach looked up from her place by the fire, surprise evident on her face. "Zach, what in heavens?" Her gaze fell on Nora, taking in her bedraggled appearance and the blood on her dress. "Oh my lord, bring her here quickly." "This is my sister, Rebecca," Zach explained as he guided Nora to a chair near the fire. "Best healer in 3 counties, though she's too modest to admit it." Rebecca moved with efficiency, gathering supplies from a nearby shelf. "What happened?" While Zach briefly explained what he knew, Rebecca carefully cleaned and bandaged Nora's wound. "It's not deep," she assured her, "but we'll need to keep it clean to prevent fever." When Rebecca went to find her some dry clothes, Nora finally gave in to the overwhelming emotions of the day. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks as she stared into the flames. "I've never had a family," she wept, the words tumbling out unexpectedly. "Not really. My parents were good people but distant, always working, always struggling. Now they're gone and I have nothing. No one." Zach knelt before her, his gaze steady and sure as he took her trembling hands in his. "You'll have mine and more," he said simply, "for as long as you need." In that moment, something passed between them, a silent understanding, a promise of protection that felt more genuine than anything she'd known before. The next morning, Nora woke to sunlight filtering through a small window. She was in a narrow bed, dressed in a borrowed nightgown, her injured shoulder stiff but less painful. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back with devastating clarity. A soft knock on the door preceded Rebecca's entrance. "Good morning," she said, carrying a steaming mug. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Nora replied, accepting the offered tea. "I can't thank you enough for taking me in." "No need for thanks. We help each other out here," Rebecca said simply. "Zach rode out at first light to check on your homestead, see what's left. He should be back by midday." Nora nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "There won't be much. They were thorough." Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed. "Zach told me what you said last night about family." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Our parents died when I was 16 and Zach was 20. Influenza. We know something about being alone." "I'm sorry," Nora murmured. "Don't be. We managed. Zach took care of me, worked himself to the bone to keep this place. That's what family does." Rebecca stood, smoothing her apron. "Rest a bit more, then come have some breakfast when you're ready." Over the following days, Nora slowly recovered her strength. Zach had returned with the grim news that her homestead was indeed destroyed. But he'd managed to salvage a few items from the ruins: her mother's tarnished hand mirror, a singed family Bible, and remarkably, a small wooden box containing several letters and a faded photograph of her parents on their wedding day. These treasures, meager as they were, meant everything to Nora. She'd wept when Zach presented them to her, wrapped carefully in a clean cloth. "Thank you," she'd whispered, clutching the items to her chest. "I thought I'd lost everything." "Sometimes the smallest things carry the most weight," he'd replied, his normally confident demeanor softening as he watched her. As days turned to weeks, Nora found herself settling into life at the Finch cabin. She insisted on earning her keep, helping Rebecca with cooking and mending, learning to tend the vegetable garden behind the cabin. She discovered that Rebecca had been teaching several of the children from nearby homesteads to read and write, and soon Nora was assisting with these impromptu lessons as well. Zach, she learned, raised horses, not many, but quality stock that brought good prices from the army and wealthy ranchers alike. He was respected in the scattered community, known for his fairness and willingness to help neighbors in need. One evening, after Rebecca had retired early with a headache, Nora and Zach sat together on the porch, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. "I should find a way to move on soon," Nora said suddenly, though the thought of leaving filled her with unexpected dread. "I can't impose on your kindness forever." Zach was silent for a long moment. "Where would you go?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Perhaps to Helena. I could find work as a seamstress or a teacher's assistant." "Is that what you want?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Nora considered the question honestly. "No," she finally said, "but I can't stay here indefinitely. It isn't proper." Zach turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "You could if you had a reason to stay." Her heart quickened at his words, at the intent behind them. Over these weeks, she'd grown increasingly aware of him, his quiet strength, his gentle way with the horses, the rare but transformative smile that lit his entire face. She'd noticed the way his gaze followed her, how he always seemed to know when she needed help before she asked, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words held special meaning. "What reason might that be?" she asked softly. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Nora," he said, his voice low and earnest. "But I think you know I've grown fond of you, more than fond." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders broke the moment. Zach was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Get inside," he ordered, his entire demeanor changing as he stepped in front of her protectively. "Wake Rebecca and stay away from the windows." Heart pounding, Nora hurried inside to alert Rebecca, who was already awake and reaching for the shotgun kept above the door. "How many?" Rebecca whispered. "I couldn't tell. At least 3, I think." They watched through a crack in the curtains as Zach stood his ground on the porch, silhouetted against the faint light from inside. 4 riders emerged from the darkness, their horses blowing hard from the climb. "Finch!" A familiar voice called out, sending ice through Nora's veins. "Silas Morgan. We know you're harboring the Sullivan girl. Hand her over and we'll be on our way." "You're not welcome here, Morgan," Zach's voice carried clearly in the night air. "Turn around and ride out while you still can." Morgan's laugh was ugly. "You willing to die for some girl you barely know? That land is rightfully mine now." "Nothing rightful about burning out honest folks," Zach countered. "The law might be interested in hearing about that." "Law's a long way from here," one of Morgan's men sneered. "And accidents happen all the time in these mountains." Nora couldn't bear it. These men had already taken everything from her. She wouldn't let them harm the people who had shown her such kindness. Before Rebecca could stop her, she slipped toward the door. "Nora, don't." Rebecca hissed, but Nora was already stepping onto the porch beside Zach. "I'm here, Morgan," she called out, forcing steadiness into her voice despite her fear. "But that land was never yours, and we both know it." Zach's arm came around her waist, pulling her slightly behind him while keeping his eyes on the mounted men. "Go back inside," he murmured. "No," she whispered back. "I won't hide anymore." Morgan's face twisted with anger even in the dim light. "Your pa signed that land over to me when he took my money. I've got the papers to prove it." "My father never borrowed from you," Nora challenged. "Any papers you have are forgeries." "Doesn't matter what you believe, girl," Morgan spat. That land is mine now, and you've got no claim to it without your folks." "She has us," Rebecca said, emerging from the cabin with the shotgun held confidently in her hands. "And unlike you, we have friends in this valley, people who know what kind of man you really are." Morgan's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. Even with superior numbers, facing down 3 armed opponents in the dark wasn't the easy victory he'd anticipated. "This isn't over," he finally said, turning his horse. "That land will be mine. You can't hide up here forever. Send your thugs again, and it'll be the last mistake you make," Zach warned, his voice deadly calm. "Now get off my property." They watched in tense silence as Morgan and his men rode away, only relaxing once the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. "He'll be back," Rebecca said grimly, lowering the shotgun. "Not tonight," Zach replied, "but we'll need to be careful. I'll ride to town tomorrow, talk to Sheriff Dawson." He turned to Nora, his expression softening with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands were trembling. "I'm sorry I put you both in danger." "You didn't," Zach assured her, his hand still at her waist, warm and steadying. "Morgan's had it in for me since I refused to sell him horses last year. He was looking for an excuse." Later that night, unable to sleep, Nora slipped outside to sit on the porch steps. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the vast Montana sky. She heard the door open behind her but didn't turn, somehow knowing it was Zach. Couldn't sleep. He asked, settling beside her on the step. "Too much thinking," she admitted. "About what happens next, about Morgan." "We'll handle Morgan," Zach said with quiet confidence. "As for what happens next," he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "That's partly up to you." Nora turned to face him, struck once again by the intensity of his gaze even in the dim starlight. "Before they arrived, you were saying something, about a reason for me to stay." A small smile touched his lips. "I was. I'd like to hear the rest." Zach took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I know it hasn't been long, and maybe this is forward of me, but I've never been one to waste time when I know what I want." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you might consider making this your home, properly, as my wife." Though she'd begun to suspect the direction of his thoughts, the actual words still took her breath away. "Zach, you don't need to answer now," he quickly added. "I know you've been through hell these past weeks. Just know that the offer stands. Rebecca loves having you here, and I." He faltered, then pressed on. "I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, Nora." She looked at their joined hands, then back to his face. "I came here with nothing. No home, no possessions, no family." "You have family now," he said softly, echoing his words from that first night. "If you want it." In that moment, Nora realized the truth of it. In this place, with these people, she'd found something she'd never truly had before, not just shelter, but belonging. A home in the truest sense. "Yes," she whispered, her heart suddenly light despite the dangers still facing them. "Yes, I want it. I want to stay." The smile that broke across Zach's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded, her hand rising to rest against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally parted, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I'll make you happy, Nora. I swear it." "You already have," she replied, and meant it. Morning brought both resolve and a plan. Zach rode to town to speak with Sheriff Dawson, while Nora and Rebecca continued with their daily tasks, the shotgun never far from reach. When Zach returned late in the afternoon, his expression was grim but determined. "Sheriff knows Morgan's been running roughshod over smaller homesteaders," he explained as they gathered around the kitchen table. "But without proof, his hands are tied. Morgan's got money and influence. What about my parents' land? Nora asked. He can't just take it. Without clear title or family to claim it, he might, Zach admitted, unless we can prove his papers are forged. Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze Nora's hand. Do you have any of your father's papers? Anything with his signature. Nora thought of the wooden box Zach had salvaged. The letters. My father wrote some of them. His signature would be there. That evening, they carefully examined the salvaged letters, comparing Joseph Sullivan's flowing script to the crude forgery Morgan had filed with the land office, a copy of which Sheriff Dawson had provided to Zach. It's not even close, Rebecca said, placing the documents side by side. Anyone could see these weren't written by the same hand. It might be enough, Zach agreed, but Morgan won't give up easily. He's not just after your land, Nora. He wants the whole valley, including this place. Then we fight, Nora said firmly. Not just for my parents' land, but for everyone he's tried to bully. Over the next few days, they formulated their strategy. Word was sent to neighboring homesteads' families who had also suffered Morgan's intimidation, but had been too afraid to stand alone. A meeting was arranged at the Finch cabin, with Sheriff Dawson in attendance. On the night of the meeting, Nora was amazed to see nearly 20 people crowded into the small cabin, each with their own story of Morgan's threats and underhanded tactics. I've suspected for years, but could never prove anything, Sheriff Dawson said, examining the collection of documents they'd gathered. With all of this and your testimonies, we might finally have enough to bring him to justice. He won't come quietly, one of the older homesteaders warned. Man like that backed into a corner, he's dangerous. That's why we moved together, Zach replied. Not one or two of us that he can pick off, but all of us, united. The plan was set. In 2 days' time, they would all ride into town together, present their evidence to the judge who was due to arrive for the circuit court, and finally put an end to Morgan's reign of terror in the valley. As the neighbors departed, Nora stood on the porch with Zach, watching the line of lanterns wind down the mountain trail like fireflies in the darkness. Are you afraid? She asked, not looking at him. Only of losing what matters, he answered honestly, drawing her close. But we're doing what's right. That has to count for something. The following day passed in tense preparation. Zach checked and rechecked their weapons while Nora and Rebecca packed provisions for the journey to town. That evening, Rebecca announced she was turning in early, giving Zach a meaningful look that made Nora smile despite her nerves. Alone by the fire, Zach took Nora's hands in his. I want you to stay with the Wilsons tomorrow, he said. Their place is furthest from town and safest if things go wrong. No, Nora said firmly. My parents' land is at the center of this. I need to be there. Nora, I'm not fragile, Zach. I've lost everything once already. I won't hide while others fight my battles. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, but promise me you'll stay close. I couldn't bear to lose you now. You won't, she assured him, leaning forward to kiss him softly. We're building something here, remember, a family. I plan to see that through. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn day that seemed at odds with the gravity of their mission. Nora dressed in her best dress, one of Rebecca's, altered to fit her slighter frame and pinned her hair up neatly. If she was to face down the man who had destroyed her home, she would do so with dignity. The ride to town was largely silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the final hill, the small settlement of Pine Creek came into view below, nestled against the backdrop of towering mountains. Under different circumstances, Nora might have found it picturesque. They rode in together, 20 strong, drawing curious stares from the townsfolk as they made their way to the courthouse. Sheriff Dawson met them on the steps, his expression both relieved and anxious. "Judge Harmon is inside," he informed them, "but so is Morgan. Got wind of what we were planning somehow." "Doesn't matter," Zach said, dismounting and helping Nora down. "We've got the truth on our side." The courthouse was crowded, with Morgan and several of his men already seated near the front. He turned as they entered, his face darkening when he spotted Nora on Zach's arm. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. Judge Harmon, a stern-faced man with steel-gray hair, called the impromptu hearing to order. "I understand there are serious allegations being made against Mr. Morgan," he began. "Sheriff Dawson, please present the evidence." What followed was a methodical presentation of testimonies and documents. Neighbors spoke of threats and mysterious accidents befalling those who opposed Morgan. The forged signatures were presented, with Nora providing her father's authentic letters for comparison. Morgan's attorney objected repeatedly, but even he seemed to realize the tide was turning against his client. When it was Morgan's turn to speak, his usual bluster had been replaced by a cold, calculated anger. "These are baseless accusations from people too incompetent to work their own land," he claimed. "I've brought civilization and progress to this valley. Without me, you'd all still be living in dirt-floor shacks. Progress built on theft and intimidation isn't progress at all," Nora responded, stepping forward despite Zach's warning hand on her arm. "My parents worked that land honestly. They died believing it would be my legacy." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "Your parents were fools who didn't understand the changing times. That land needs someone with vision." "The only vision you have is for your own gain," Zach interjected, moving to stand beside Nora. "You've threatened and bullied honest people for years." Judge Harmon listened to the exchanges with growing severity. "I've seen enough," he finally declared. "Mr. Morgan, these forgeries alone are sufficient to warrant criminal charges. Combined with the testimonies I've heard today, I'm remanding you to custody pending a formal trial." The judge's words were met with stunned silence, then a murmur of disbelief that quickly grew to a rumble of approval from the gathered homesteaders. Morgan's face contorted with rage. In a flash of movement, he reached inside his jacket and pulled a small Derringer pistol, aiming directly at Nora. "If I can't have that land, neither will you," he snarled. Everything happened in an instant. Zach shoved Nora aside as the gun discharged, the bullet whistling past where she had stood a moment before. Sheriff Dawson and his deputy were on Morgan immediately, wrestling him to the ground as women screamed and men shouted in alarm. In the chaos, Nora found herself on the floor, Zach's protective body covering hers. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands frantically checking her for injuries. "No, I'm fine," she assured him, breathless from the fall and the shock. "You saved me." Relief flooded his features as he helped her to her feet. Across the room, Morgan was being restrained and disarmed, his face a mask of thwarted fury. "It's over," Rebecca said, appearing at their side. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." Judge Harmon quickly restored order to the courtroom. "In light of this assault, Mr. Morgan will be held without bail until his trial. Sheriff, remove him from my court." As Morgan was led away in handcuffs, he shot one last venomous glare at Nora and Zach. "This isn't over," he spat. "You'll regret this day." "The only regret is that we didn't stop you sooner," Zach replied evenly, his arm tight around Nora's waist. Outside the courthouse, the gathered homesteaders celebrated their victory with handshakes and embraces. Sheriff Dawson approached Nora with a stack of papers. "Judge Harmon signed these straight away," he explained. "Full title to your parents' land, legally in your name now. Morgan can't touch it, even if he somehow weasels out of jail time." Nora accepted the documents with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, tears of relief stinging her eyes. Later that evening, as they prepared to return to the cabin, Zach pulled Nora aside in the relative privacy of the livery stable where they'd left their horses. "Today changes things," he said, taking both her hands in his. "Your land is yours again. You could rebuild, make a fresh start there if you wanted." Nora studied his face, noting the careful neutrality of his expression that couldn't quite mask the uncertainty in his eyes. "Is that what you think I want? I think you should have choices," he replied. "Real ones, not just taking what's offered because you have nowhere else to go." She stepped closer, resting her palm against his cheek. "I made my choice the night I said I wanted to stay, Zach. Not out of desperation or gratitude, but because I found something with you I never thought possible." "And what's that?" he asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Home," she said simply. "Not just a place, but a feeling, belonging, love." The word hung between them, new and powerful. Zach's hands tightened on hers. "I do love you, Nora Sullivan. More than I thought possible in such a short time." "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and completely natural. "So no, I don't want to rebuild my parents' homestead. At least, not to live there. But perhaps someday we could use the land for something good. A school, maybe, or a place for families just starting out." The smile that spread across Zach's face was radiant. "Always thinking of others. That's one of the countless reasons I love you." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. "I've been carrying this for days, waiting for the right moment." He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl at its center. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Rebecca insisted I should give it to you, said she'd never seen me look at anyone the way I look at you." Nora's breath caught as he took her left hand. "Nora Sullivan, I asked you once to be my wife. Now I'm asking again, with no threats hanging over us and all choices open to you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, joy bubbling up inside her like a spring. "Yes, with all my heart." He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her. Then he pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly, pouring all his love and promise into the embrace. Rebecca found them there minutes later, clearing her throat in amused embarrassment. "If you two are quite finished, the others are waiting to start back." Nora blushed, but couldn't stop smiling as she showed Rebecca the ring. "Finally," Rebecca exclaimed, hugging them both. "Now I can officially call you sister." The ride back to the cabin was different from the tense journey of that morning. Though tired, the group was buoyant with their victory and the promise of peaceful days ahead. That night, as they sat together on the porch under a canopy of stars, Nora rested her head on Zach's shoulder, her mother's salvaged hand mirror and her father's letters safely stored inside, alongside the land deed that represented not just her past, but a future full of possibility. "What are you thinking?" Zach asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "That I never expected any of this," she admitted. "When I lost my parents, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." "We'll build something good together," he promised. "A home, a family." "We already have," she said, thinking of Rebecca, of the neighbors who had stood with them, of the community that had come together in the face of adversity. "But I'm looking forward to making it even bigger." 6 months later, on a perfect spring day, Nora Sullivan became Nora Finch in a ceremony attended by nearly everyone in the valley. They were married beneath the branches of a flowering apple tree Zach had planted the day after their engagement, a symbol of the roots they were putting down together. The former Sullivan homestead, now legally the property of Nora and Zach, was indeed becoming a school, with Rebecca as its teacher and additional cabins being built to house families new to the territory, including several who had fled Morgan's oppression in other areas, and were now returning to make fresh starts. As for Morgan himself, he had been convicted and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison, his empire of intimidation crumbling in his absence as stolen lands were returned to their rightful owners. On their wedding night, as they stood together on the porch of the cabin that had become their home, Zach wrapped his arms around Nora from behind, his hands resting gently on her still flat stomach. "You think it's too soon to start expanding our family?" he murmured against her ear. Nora turned in his embrace, her eyes shining with love and promise. "I think," she said, placing her hand over his, "that we may have already begun." The joy that bloomed on his face was everything she could have wished for the look of a man who had found his purpose and his heart's desire all at once. "From I've never had a family to creating our own," he marveled, drawing her close. "Life has a way of surprising you." "The best kind of surprise," she agreed, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as the first stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, bearing witness to a love that had blossomed from the ashes of loss into something enduring and true, a family, and more, just as he had promised.